Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea Tranquility. Welcome to a very special episode of the show. We've got a great guest star here today who's taken some time out of his schedule to talk to us. Welcome the great Nick DiSalvo, guitarist and vocalist from Elder, all the way from Berlin, Germany, right?
That's correct. Thank you for the very kind introduction.
So happy to have you on here. We've actually been wanting to get you on for quite a while now, and we finally got our schedules to align, which is great. And it's perfect timing because Nick's got hopefully a lot of great stuff to talk about in relation to Innate Passage, which is the brand newish album from Elder, which came out back in the fall, in late 2022 here. And congrats on the CD. It's excellent, and it kind of follows a long line of really excellent albums. But so this particular album here, to my ears anyway, and you can kind of give your take on it, but this seems to kind of continue in that much more progressive and psych style that I think you guys really jumped into heavy with Omens, which came out in 2020. Could you kind of maybe take our viewers on a journey through like the evolution of the band, going back to 2008 with the self-titled debut, which, back in the day, you guys were much more of like kind of like a stoner doom type of band with those type of influences, and kind of how you've gotten to where you are today. Because if you listen to the first album and you listen to this album, it's kind of different, right? But you can kind of hear the progression as you go through the catalog. Your kind of take on the whole evolution of the band and the sound.
Yeah, well, it's funny, not that this is a great intro to the whole thing, but I think I was talking to a friend last night I met about how like the whole Led Zeppelin catalog and the whole like Beatles catalog happened within the span of 10 years or something. And now that kind of haunted me to realize that Elder's been a band now for longer than the career of like, some of the most storied and varied rock bands of all history. And I don't really know why that just floated to the forefront of my mind, because I'm like, shit, like, I always think of us as having been a band that's done a lot of different styles, but like, not really when compared to some others. But nonetheless, like we did start off as like a very primitive band, three teenage friends, me, Jack Donovan, and Matt Kudo. We've known each other since we were more or less in like elementary and middle school, growing up in small community near New Bedford, Massachusetts. So in the Northeast of the U.S. for any non-North American
I know
listeners.
it well. Yeah. Yes, I spend a lot of time in the Boston area. So yeah.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, and we were like three of the only really like heavy music interested kids playing music at all, in a relatively active at that time like music community. Like back in the day, I would say like in the 2000s, at least in New England, there was like a really good local scene, mostly hardcore bands, a lot of like straight edge bullshit, but there were like a lot of kids getting together and like making music and putting on shows for each other, VFW halls. We had a couple all ages venues. It was a pretty cool thing in retrospect. And so us three were kind of the only ones who were interested in like heavy stuff, stoner metal, doom, that kind of shit. And we found our way together through other projects and founded Elder around 2007 and recorded the first album, which was kind of just like more or less like a love letter to the bands that we listened to at the time. It was pretty standard, like run of the mill, not that ambitious stoner or doom, with a touch of psychedelic influence. And I think the fact that record got picked up and put out was the first it was like the first catalyst for us to become a little bit more ambitious and realize like, okay, this is more than just some hobby project. This could be an actual band. And we were just like 18. We were just starting college at that time. So we had a lot of other shit going on, and we didn't really have a chance to dedicate ourselves full time to the band until that was kind of out of the way, which is why things were kind of stop-start for a while at the beginning. And Deadwood Stirring was the next record that came out that finally showed us experimenting a little bit more in the psychedelic direction. And just from there, I got to give the kind of stock answer that I always give. It's just like, I think the experiences of like growing up and the fact that we've been playing in this band throughout our, from the end of our teens now all through our 20s and now into our like mid 30s, just like the experiences of life and all the influences that you gather along those very formative years have really left a mark on the kind of music that we play as a band. And as our influences have gotten a little bit greater, over the years, and as we become a little bit more mature as people and musicians, I think that all bleeds into the music that we make, coming from very, like I said, relatively primitive, let's make as loud, as heavy music as possible and smoke weed and drink beers and whatever, now to like more of a, mature kind of like, oh, what do we want to say with our music? What do we want to, what are our interests, and, what kind of a story can we tell? It's just, it all felt like a very natural progression to me. And I think if you listen to the discography in chronological order, it kind of does feel that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When I started getting into the band, it's amazing when you kind of start on a certain album and then like backtrack and pick up the earlier records and then kind of listen to them in sequence. You can totally hear the maturity and the evolution of your sound as you go from album to album. And I think with this latest one, this is, to me, kind of like the pinnacle. Well, I don't want to say the pinnacle because hopefully you got lots of good stuff to come, but I think this is like, you can see that upward swing going from like one style to incorporating all these other elements. And this is just so mature, and just, I think we see the fully and hear the fully realized Elder on this particular one here. So for those who haven't checked this album out yet, or some of the Elder catalog, I think your hardcore fans have gotten used to the fact that you guys are pretty good with like long form compositions, right? The shortest song on this album is about 9 minutes long, right? So there's some pretty long epics on here. And I asked the same question to Sean from King Buffalo a couple of months ago, because they have a similar way of putting together songs that you guys do. Did any of these songs like maybe start out, I'm trying to like go back to the genesis of when you're writing and putting together these songs. Did any of them start out as like really long jams that you kind of maybe took bits and pieces of and edited down a little bit? Or were any of these compositions like maybe shorter little bits and things that you kind of put together to create what we now have on this particular album?
Probably more of the latter. Because the band is basically has like two homes. Three of us live in Berlin, and our bassist is still located in Massachusetts. We don't really, or, since at least some of us relocated over here, we haven't really been able to like write together so much. The last record where we really did that was the Gold and Silver Sessions, kind of like a jammy EP that we recorded on tour some years ago. And so I've been doing, I've always been the principal songwriter of the band, but since 2016, I've been doing pretty much like everything for songwriting. And this record, well, let's say the three of us who live here did meet a lot to jam on the ideas that are on there, but I think it was still very much like a composed thing. And I do often work on many ideas at a single time, and I'll be like recording in my own home studio, which is just a computer basically. And sometimes when I get stuck, I'll come back to another idea and remember like, oh yeah, this kind of like aborted idea, like maybe if you flip it and change the rhythm and do this and that, like you can fit it into this song. So certainly, like now I couldn't tell you where, but this is like a way I've been working for years at this point, where some ideas will just be out there, and then if you really get stuck, you can return and see if that like now fits. It's like the missing piece of the puzzle,
right?
So yeah, there are even songs that like didn't make it to this record, as there always are like leftover ideas that will make it to the next record in some incarnation too. Which I think also helps that kind of feeling of continuity, because like sometimes there are ideas that were actually born in another generation of the band and they find their way into a later record.
There you go. Yeah, very cool. So you mentioned three of you relocating to Berlin. So what kind of prompted that?
In 2015, I returned from a really long tour in Europe. It was like 2 months long, and that was like right when the band was starting to do more, and really it was clear to us that like we were going to be a full-time band, and like really kind of cast our put all of our eggs in that one basket and do that. And I came home back to Providence, Rhode Island, where I was living at the time, and basically like my life kind of fell apart on that tour. Like a long-term relationship ended. I got like I got kicked out / left where I was living. I ended up like in some shitty house in Boston with some guys I barely knew, working as a dishwasher at a Mexican restaurant. And like, I just kind of hated I didn't hate my life, but I wasn't really happy with like where my location was. And I didn't think it was like really that beneficial to my creative life. And I lived in Germany for some years in the past because I was an exchange student in high school here. And
Okay.
I studied German. I came back to teach to teach English in a high school here for a year. And I studied here for a year. So I had this connection. I always really loved Europe and felt myself like connected in particular to Germany. And Berlin had always been a city that I wanted to spend some time in because it's famously like a great place or has been a great place for creatives. It's relatively, or was relatively, I have to keep saying was relatively cheap. And there's a lot going on. Good place for artists. And I'm making this into a much longer story than need be. But I basically just decided to try to move over here and see what happened. I just, packed a suitcase, brought my guitar, and came over and was like, well, fuck it. I'll get a sublease for an apartment. And if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. And I'll just, buy a plane ticket home. And like 7 years later, it worked out. So I've just still been here. And the other guys, our drummer, Mike Risberg, who's our other guitarist, he also just kind of like, I think he was over here we were over here on tour. And then he was just like, I also got nothing better going on back home. I'm just going to do the same thing you did, see if it works. And he ended up sticking around here too. And our drummer is German now. He's a friend we've known for years. So when Matt Kudo, our original drummer, left the band in 2019, we just decided to ask him to drum because he's based over here. And I was kind of trying to selfishly tether the band a little bit more to here than back in the States. And that's how that all happened.
That totally makes sense. I mean, and what's like, obviously you're from here, and I'm sure you guys have experienced the frustration of trying to tour here and draw crowds here. Like, what's the difference between how it is to tour and play live over in Europe with this style of music as opposed to here in the States?
Well, for us, like if you had asked this question a couple of years ago, I probably would have given you the response that you expect. Like the scene here is amazing and like so much more receptive and better crowds, better, at least more festivals. There's a lot of festivals that are geared towards this kind of music. But now actually, like, I don't know if it's because of the pandemic. I don't know if it's because of nothing related to that, but certainly we've noticed that like our fan base in the States has become much bigger than in Europe. And I mean, there's more people in the States than there are in like any individual European country. So easier to say, but our shows in the States have been great recently. But the main difference is really that I think the culture of hospitality is different over here, that you never really like expect. There's just a weird different way of doing things in the States. Like it's over here, our artists are kind of like always treated as, as artists worthy of at least, a hot meal, a shower, and a place to sleep. And that's been the case since, we were just playing in squats, back in the day to like current era. So I think there's that, but I see it also just kind of like it all depends on like really what level you're playing at. Like we got treated like crap in the States for a very long time, but like now that we're at a certain level where we can pull a couple hundred people a night, we notice that all of a sudden there is that different culture there as well. It really just depends on who you're working with, I suppose. And I mean, Europe in our experience like hasn't really sprung back from the pandemic as much as the States. Like people I guess, economic crisis and then a lot of like touring bands at the same time. And people were still, were still concerned about coronavirus. Like we noticed that like actually the scene has had a lot harder time bouncing back and getting on its feet over here than we've seen in the States actually. Okay. And I don't really know exactly what to attribute that to.
It's hard to say. I mean, I've gone to, I've gone to lots of shows myself since kind of things lightened up a little bit with COVID. And there are some shows you go to and you're completely puzzled by the lack of attendance, and then you go to that are complete sellouts, and you're like, wow, there's a lot of people here tonight. Go figure, right? And I guess it depends on the band, the music. Yeah. I think though there seems to me to be like a buzz about the kind of like the heavy psych bands right now here in the States. We're starting to hear more and more from people who are actually really getting into this kind of music. And so maybe it's just the style is kind of on the upswing. I hope so. Right. And maybe it's kind of creeping out of the underground a little bit. So I guess time will tell. Right. But
yeah. For years, I mean, for years and years, we just kind of like, we stopped touring the States because, you know, like you're saying, like we had piss poor attendance at our shows, long drives, bad guarantees. And then, you know, you have to sleep on someone's kitchen floor on top of it or whatever. And versus Europe, it just was much easier. The infrastructure was here. But also another thing is that like all of, you know, at the latest since Brexit, all of Europe is kind of like year for year clamping down on, you know, tax. It used to be so easy to just get in a van, tour all the way across Europe and like, you know, bring home some money under the table. And now it's like every government is trying to get their cut and make things more and more restrictive on touring bands. If you're like in this gray area where you're crossing borders all the time, there's a lot of bureaucracy that gets involved relatively quickly. And so I don't know, the technological level that governments are operating at now is just like catching up to all the bands that were able to operate this way for so long. So everything's just getting more difficult everywhere. But it's nice to see the scene is growing in the States. That's very heartening. And there are even like cool festivals popping up too. At least,
yeah, there's like Psycho Las Vegas. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's good to see. I mean, we've been starved here for festivals for decades, right? And I think as a music fan living here in the States, I mean, I'm always envious of all, you know, European folks who love this style of music or any style of music, get like all these big summertime festivals all over the place, and we have nothing here. So every few that keeps popping up here, I think is a good thing, and hopefully we continue to see more of those in the years to come.
Yeah, that is definitely like fertile ground for it, as far as I can see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's just a matter of getting, you know, butts in the seats, so to speak. I mean, it's just if the people will come, they'll continue to do them. So, all right, back to the new album. I mean, like, oh, go ahead.
I'll just say, like, just last thought that, like, you know how it is, like in the States also, like you're happy to drive to shows. Like, we're not that spoiled. Like, I remember driving, you know, 2 hours, 3 hours to see a show out of state or whatever. That's another thing that you notice about American audiences. Like a lot of times people here just get a little bit, what's the right word? You know, they make life too comfortable for themselves. Oh, I'm not going to take the train, you know, 45 minutes to like this other city to see. It's like,
well, I mean, convenience is a big thing here. I mean, I especially, I think if you're a music fan of like a certain age, I'll use myself as an example. So I'm in my late 50s now, right? The length of time that I would drive to a show 20 years ago is drastically different than how far I'll travel to a show today. You know, and now I start to look at, you know, well, how late's the show going to run? How far do I have to drive? Do I have to take a train? And to me, the more convenient, the better chance I will go. And, you know, you hit the nail on the head. This is a big country, right? So it's like a lot of times you may hear of something really interesting that you want to attend, but because it's 2 hours away, I'm not going to go to that. If they're not going to come within an hour of where I live, I guess I'm not seeing the band. So I guess, you know, we have lots of I live in New York. We have lots of mass transit here, but it's not always great. It's not always perfect. And I think, you know, maybe it's a little bit easier to get to shows in Europe based on, you know, some of the countries are a bit smaller, and you know, I know you guys have lots of great mass transit in most of the major countries there. So yeah, I don't know. There's probably a lot of factors that contribute. Yeah. Unfortunately,
this isn't an interview about civil engineering, or else we could.
I know, right? With the logistics of all this is like you can talk about it for hours. So, so back to the you know, you mentioned Mike before. So Mike is your other guitar player, and he also plays lots of keyboards. So I think one of the really cool things about this album, the last two albums specifically, is there's a really nice blend of keyboard work, which adds a lot of that kind of prog and psych element to the songs. But yet there's, as always with every Elder album, there's always around the next corner, there's going to be some heavy riffing coming on. So I guess my question for you is, how much are you guys into like progressive rock these days, whether it be classic stuff from the 70s or the more recent bands that have come up around since like the 90s when prog kind of had this resurgence. And like how is, I'm not going to use the term easy, but how have you guys managed to create these songs that combine like really two different things? Because you're talking about this like majestic vintage sounding prog rock with, you know, doom and stoner and hard rock riffs, and they perfectly blend together on your albums. But yet I don't know a lot of other bands who really do it so well. I mean, how have you guys been able to really master that, especially over the last two albums, which I think really incorporate both into one kind of very synergetic style?
Yeah. I don't really know. I guess I think maybe for me, like I never really thought of us as a prog band. I mean, on some level, I recognize that like that is the style of music that we play now, but the way we started writing more progressive music wasn't really because we were like trying consciously to ape these like 70s prog bands that we do really like. I think it was just maybe like a subconscious trickling of ideas into the brain, where, you know, standard 4/4 rhythms or like just very, you know, like commonplace sounding rhythmic ideas sounded very boring, or there was just I'm not like a, you know, I'm not a trained or learned musician. And I think like a lot of ideas would just kind of pop into my head with very little regard for like, you know, what might be considered, you know, progressive or commonplace or standard or whatever. To a certain degree, it's just really like, yeah, a disregard for all stylistic boundaries and just an intention to create music that like sounds good. You know, like I'm often just, you know, playing guitar and the ideas appear, and it's not that we're, you know, trying to write music with any particular goal other than, you know, what comes from the heart, to put it in a cliche way. And because we really did, or at least, you know, Jack and I, the founders of the band, started doing this from like the school of, you know, heavy stoner rock, psychedelic rock, and not from, I don't know, like a metal background perhaps, or not from like, you know, the approach of like, this is going to be a prog band. We always wanted to write heavy rock music, but just do it in our own way. And, you know, this kind of push-pull and this interplay of like the more mellow psychedelic moments with like the heavier rock riffs. That's always just been a thing that we've done just to kind of increase the dynamic range of the band and make the heavy parts have more impact because there's, you know, they come on the back of a light part or something like that. But yeah, I mean, maybe just sometimes flying blind is the best way to do it. You just kind of close our eyes and make the music and then let the critics decide what it is at the end of the day. And I've always thought like, you know, no offense to the prog heads out there, but like, especially modern prog rock, it's like not really a genre I necessarily want to be so associated with. It's very nerdy. It's not very cool. It's and there's a lot of like totally corny crap out there. And like progressive metal has never really been my cup of tea either. It was only really this kind of, you know, the 70s prog bands, this, you know, this brief window of time before it got too like bloated and weird, and King Richard on Ice and whatever, where I thought there were a lot of like super cool ideas that sounded very genuine too, and not like some brainiac, this, you know, sitting in a laboratory or whatever. It's just, it's cool, creative rock music just for the sake of, you know, breaking down boundaries. That's what I really appreciate. Maybe that's what we try to channel somehow.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, to bring him up again, when I talked to Sean McVeigh from King Buffalo back late last year, you know, he mentioned the two bands that kind of got him interested in making music was Pink Floyd and Black Sabbath, right? And if you know King Buffalo's music at all, you can kind of see where that kind of came from. So what were the couple of bands that made you decide, yeah, this is what I got to do. I got to play music. I got to create music. What were those couple of bands that really were the spark for you?
Well, I mean, I was playing music since a very young age. Like I think that the music that actually got me interested in playing it all was punk rock. You know, just like really simple shit. You know, Black Flag, Minor Threat, adolescence, like this kind of stuff. Was the first music that I stumbled upon thanks to my older brother, who got, he's a couple of years older than me. He started bringing home records, and this spoke to my adolescence somehow, this rebellious kind of loud, angry music. And that, it's kind of through the back door of that I got interested in classic rock and stoner rock and, metal to the degree at which I listened to that. And I think there's always just been kind of like I explored a broad range of music very young. There wasn't like one band that made me say I need to found Elder, for example. By the time we started playing like stoner rock and sludge, I had already had my phase with punk rock and hardcore and metal and really cheesy metal, and listened to some hip hop and some electronic music and all sorts of stuff. And then I landed on this, and it was kind of flavor of the month at first, but it ended up being like the genre foundation that really stuck. It's like heavy, bluesy, very groovy, and very fun to play. Didn't have to be like totally technically proficient to make a really cool riff that would get stuck in your head for days. And also the appeal of playing, loud, somehow also was very appealing.
Yeah, the riff is important.
Yeah, no, there's no band that made me form Elder. If I guess that was really the question. Can't say there was.
Okay, cool. It just sounds like it's more on this accumulation of things. So that's cool too. So so you guys have been playing live quite a bit, and you've got a whole bunch of tour dates planned for 2023. How challenging is it now that you've got this nice catalog of music to come up with a set list for a tour? Do you change it often? And do you find, or have you found, that any of the compositions that you've recorded on album are maybe a little challenging to recreate live at all?
Yeah, definitely. And that's, well, to the first question, making the set list is always a kind of a pain in the ass, because it's kind of like with songs that are between generally 10 and 15 minutes long, and a set length that's between 60 and 85 minutes, like that really only gives you a handful of songs. And then to try and play like something new, something you want to play, maybe that's obscure, and then like a crowd pleaser or two, like it gets filled up pretty quickly. And so it is always like a challenge to try and hit the balance perfectly between all those factors. But with this record in particular, like I really feel excited to play a lot more new material, and I think it's going to translate very well live, despite the fact that it is always a struggle. Like we have become kind of like the studio band. Like we write the songs for the studio, and then once it's recorded, we're like, okay, how the hell are we going to play this live? There's all these keyboards and instruments, and we're only 4 people and not really interested in adding any other people live. So how are you going to do it? And we strip down the versions live, but it is, sometimes a struggle to faithfully reconstruct the music. And yeah, definitely sometimes, like now we're practicing, we're rehearsing for the shows already and playing some of the new material for the first time since we recorded. And I'm like, shit, I wish I'd thought about how I'm supposed to like play this part and sing at the same time when I was writing it, because just like rhythmic things that don't go together at all, or like, crazy chord where I really need to like, look at the guitar with both hands. I'm just not that good. So, but those are the kind of things that we need to, they're like this, the stepping stones to help us get better as musicians as well. Challenging ourselves. First, you multi-track the record, and then you have to figure out how to play it live. And that, I think you grow through that experience. Yeah.
It's all part of the picture, right?
Yeah, totally.
So here's
but also a reason that I want to put down things and play. Like I do want to do another, like I've told myself now for the past 2 records, like, okay, next record, we're meeting up, we're like renting a hut in the mountains, and we're just gonna write the fucking thing together and record it live. No more of this crazy bullshit. We'll see if it happens.
Something to work towards, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things I'm dying to ask you, because I'm a fan of both bands. So back in 2021, you guys released A Story of Darkness and Light, which was kind of like a collaboration between Elder and the German band Cadaver. So can you talk about that album? It's a fantastic album, and how that kind of came to be, and whether there are any plans to...
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, that was in the middle of the pandemic here. Trying to remember. Yeah, I mean, and there wasn't a whole lot to do at that time. We were like, um, when was that? I think trying to remember now. Oh, I don't remember where we first met the dudes now. In any case, for some reason or another, they invited us over to their studio, the three of us who are living here, just to hang out and talk. And the idea came up somehow about maybe trying to jam for a weekend. I'm trying to forget if this was because at one point I talked to them about perhaps recording an Elder album at their studio. Maybe it was because of that. We came over and checked it out. And through that like meeting, we had the idea to just like, hey, we're all here in Berlin. We've got nothing better to do. Like, why don't we get all our instruments together and like just jam for a weekend and see if anything interesting happens? They had done that with another band called I think like Aqua Nebula Generator or something back in the day. And we were all about it just because it sounded like fun. So we did just that. They have the rehearsal space is a fully equipped recording studio right in the city. So we just brought down our stuff. We mic'd up everything and we started playing for like a couple hours straight and really quickly realized like everyone's just kind of floating around. You know, there's two drummers, there's a bunch of guitarists, like only one bassist, but sometimes he was also playing like guitar, and we were switching off on the keyboards, just, you know, being kids in a toy store basically. And we really felt that like there was some interesting music chemistry there. Aside from just having fun, I was also like, oh, you know, I didn't know that these guys had so many influences and like we're so you know, musically diverse based on what they do with Cadaver. Wasn't exactly sure what to expect, and maybe they felt the same way. So after the first day of jamming, we were already like, okay, this is cool, but we have the feeling we can do something in a pointed direction and like make a record out of this. So we spent the following 2 days on that weekend fleshing out like another song or two that we recorded right there, and then reworking some of the older ideas. And it became like a project over the next couple of months to meet every once in a while and do some studio overdubs, cut things up. We recorded a couple other tracks that were more like composed for it. And yeah, that's how it all came together. And since then, I think we've all felt kind of like in the immediate aftermath of that, like that was the question, like, oh, would you do it again? Like, will this happen live? And I think we're very much like, yeah, maybe that sounds cool. But I feel like now that things have cooled off, it's nice to look back at that in retrospect as like a project in the time and place, and maybe just leave well enough alone. Like there's nothing worse than overdoing something. It was a fun, spontaneous project really that became something none of us were really planning on. Best case scenario, I think.
And so many people loved it. And I have to wonder because the most recent Cadaver album kind of is in a similar vein. And I wonder if the whole experience of them playing with you guys maybe influenced them a little bit on directions that they wanted to kind of investigate, you know, on their own. So who knows? But yeah, a really cool project. And I hadn't even heard about it till like months after it came out. And a fan of both bands, I was like, oh, this could be really interesting. And it absolutely was. I mean, it's a pretty cool album. And you can hear like, you know, bits of your own personalities in there, but yet it's something new and different, which is kind of cool. So, well, you know what? If you guys ever decide to do it again, I'm sure you'll have plenty of people who will be into it. So
yeah, no, I mean, it's for sure. It's that's not for, you know, for lack of interest necessarily. Now both bands are up and like touring and doing their own things again. I know they've got at least one other record they're working on at the moment. So we'll see. But it was definitely a fun experience. Yeah, it's cool.
Cool. Are there any other bands on the scene that you've played with or you listen to that you would recommend to viewers who maybe like Elder's music?
There's a great local band here called Perilymph, Perylymph, who is like a very international troupe, some French dudes, I think an Australian or a guy from New Zealand. And they kind of play, it's like they play like psychedelic progressive rock with a very like French feel to it, you know, kind of like Stereolab influence, very dreamy pop melodies. They're probably my favorite local band. And This Friday, I'm going to see Rotor, ROTOR, who you might know. They're like a very long-running Berlin band that plays the festival circuit around here, but I don't think they've ever done anything in the States. Instrumental, like heavy progressive, like stoner-ish rock. I think your viewers would really like them if they haven't heard them already. They're like a local legends and somewhat known in Europe, but I think the kind of dudes who like to just make music in their practice space and don't really care about conquering the world. So
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, they're real cool. So yeah, definitely. I think those two would probably go over well with your audience. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll go find some information on them and maybe put a link to maybe they got a Bandcamp page or a website, and I'll put that down in the comments of the video for people to check out. So before I let you go, two quick questions. Whenever we have someone here on the channel, always like to do a little bit of gear talk because we got a lot of gear heads who watch Via Tranquility. So what types of guitars and amps and effects are you using in the studio and bringing out on tour with you these days?
I'm usually playing my Dunable Yeti on all of our tours. And Dunable is a small company out of LA. Sasha Dunable is the guitarist of Intronaut. He's like a progressive metal band you probably know of. Yeah. Him and I believe like one other guy, Aaron, are making these guitars, and they just make like totally fantastic, awesomely built, awesome sounding instruments that are made for heavy music because they're like, they're basically constructed to be down tuned lower and hold stability and stuff like that. And they're making me another guitar for our upcoming US tour, which I'm really stoked about. I have a couple other guitars like Gibson's. I have a Gibson 61 reissue SG that I played for many years in the band, but just the damn thing could not hang on for 12 minutes straight without going massively out of tune, and had so many lost so many battles on the road and with airport baggage handlers that it had to be retired. I have an ES335 that I like to play in my other project, Delving, and a local builder called Kamo Guitars just built me another guitar here that's kind of like it's kind of like a Jaguar style body, but with humbuckers. I was never a guitar guy, and all of a sudden I have all these guitars, and I don't know how it happened.
It happens very easily, Nick. I mean, it's an addiction. It really is.
I used to just be like, oh, I have one guitar. It's the only guitar I own. It's the only guitar I play. And now I feel like ashamed saying I have like so many. But and same thing with effect pedals, man. I've got like literally have like drawers full of them here. You know, I had them in like a vitrine earlier, and our practice space is full of them. I went like down this path over the past couple of years of changing my pedal board to a MIDI controlled set, like one central MIDI brain that controls a bunch of like digital pedals, like an Empress ecosystem delay. I've got a Maris, Mercury 7 reverb. It controls those, but it also controls like a loop switcher, which turns on and off analog pedals. And now I'm like really nerdily programming every single song to have extremely specific, per button changes. So like if you need to because all of our albums have a lot of different sounds, especially guitar, a lot of different effects where it's easy in studio to just like, all right, stop the take. We're going to, change this pedal, that, and the other thing. It's been my kind of project to like try and make a pedal board that can really faithfully recreate all of the sounds that we use on the records too. But at the base of my sound is always just, I use British style amps, like high watts are my mainstays over here. I have a Sound City 120 in the States that I really like. I have a couple Marshalls, JMPs from the 70s, just that sound, and sometimes a fuzz, but usually, a cranked amp is kind of like the sound. And then, everything else is just, frosting on top.
I hear you.
But I don't want to bore anyone who's not a totally obsessive nerd like maybe you or me because I could talk for hours about this stuff, and it's just not the best for my mental health.
So before we let you go, again, the new album is Innate Passage from Elder. Check it out if you haven't already. So I know this album just came out, but you guys have been pretty prolific in recent years. You come out with stuff fairly quickly, if not every year, every other year. And you mentioned you have some stuff that was left over you didn't use for this particular release. You guys already thinking ahead to like what could be the next Elder album down the road, maybe the end of this year or into next year?
I'm trying to think about it, but right now I'm really focusing on finishing another record with my solo project, Delving. I've got a lot of ideas that I'm kind of one track minded right now because we only have a few months off before the tour starts up again. So I'm really trying to finish and record another record before that happens. And then I think I can reset my brain and start thinking about heavy music again. But there's at least 2 songs that are pretty much completely done that we could put on another record. So I'd say, the groundwork's already laid and we just need to get to it.
Cool. So tour starting up here in the not too distant future. Any particular markets that you're looking forward to hitting?
This upcoming tour is going to be pretty interesting because we're going to be doing another tour later on down the road with like more, I don't know, standard cities, big markets. This one is kind of like we're going off the beaten path in a lot of places that we haven't ever played before, smaller cities, and exploring parts of Canada that we haven't been to. So I think in general, it's going to be an interesting tour, and it'll probably be small, cozy, smaller clubs, which is always a lot of fun, more intimate, and sometimes, wilder just because you're that much closer to the people. So, yeah. And like I said, our last tour in the States was like, it just blew our mind how many people came out, how excited people were, just not something we were used to from US tours. So that we really like left on a high note, which is nice, feeling like shit, like the US scene, like it's really, showing out for us. And that's we're really grateful for that. So really looking forward to that tour.
Cool. Any notable bands that you guys are taking out with you, or are you basically just kind of local bands from city to city?
No, actually we'll be on tour with Ruby the Hatchet and Howling Giant for the whole time. Very cool. It's the full package. And we did the last US tour with Ruby for a couple weeks. They're really great. Like heavy psychedelic rock. The front woman, Jill, is like a really great singer. They have an amazing organ player who's just like going wild on stage the whole time. Just super cool band. And Howling Giant is also they're kind of similar to Elder, like heavy psychedelic rock. They do their own thing too, but it's going to be a good package. Probably not tons of local support because 3 bands is generally enough for most people on any given night. But I think it'll be a pretty solid bill.
Cool. I got to look at the tour dates and see what's kind of closest to me and see what I can make. So, because I'm in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, you're in the city, I take it.
Yeah, I'm about 70 miles north of New York City, so I'm like right between like New York City and Albany. So,
okay, I know we're playing in Buffalo. I think that's nowhere near that, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of far. Yeah, I'll take.
Shows you my New York geographical knowledge.
Yeah, I'll take a look at the dates and see what I can do. So cool. Well, Nick, thanks so much.
We'll be back sooner rather than later, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate it. And like we mentioned, Innate Passage is the latest Elder album. Please go check it out, and go check out the band On Tour, which is starting up fairly soon. And visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube, all together, all the damn time. For Nick DiSalvo, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you real soon here on the channel. Take care.